Have you ever wanted to start a podcast but don't know where to start? On this episode of the WAC Attack podcast, we're going to walk you through our experience setting up a full-blown video podcast, our studio, our equipment, our processes, our reasons why, and how we went from idea to execution with a successful podcast. This is not an episode you are going to want to miss. And we're live on the WAC Attack one more time tonight. It's Monday night. Wally, Curtis, and I are here with you all. And tonight's episode, we're going to talk about how to start a podcast and launch it successfully online.
That we are.
And so it's going to be quite a fun topic here. We have all spent a lot of time researching this, putting together the studio, putting together a lot of our equipment, consulting our audio engineer, Kyle Barr, from KWB Creative.
Our audio engineer.
I'm sorry, our video vendor, Kyle Barr from KWB Creative. That's episode number 15. We also have Megan Hammer. That's our audio engineer.
Yes.
Episode number 17. And so we're here to talk about, our experience.
Producers, plural.
Producers,
Shout out
Scott, and producers Alex
and Katie.
And producers Katie, right?
Yeah.
And so we've cycled through a bunch of equipment. We also, in the consulting firm, we have a special effects studio vendor who's helped us with some recommendations. And so
not just helped us with some recommendations. I mean, industry insider experience onto best bang for your buck.
Right. And so when we I like that, best bang for your buck. And so when we talk about how you can successfully start and launch a podcast, there's really that framework that you have to go through. And for us, we determined what our framework was and what we wanted to do. So
that's a really great topic for us to dive into initially here. So, flashback over half a year ago, we had collectively made the decision. We've been talking about doing this for a long time, years, more than 5 years. And we decided to just jump ship and do it. Alan, you happen to be the person that had the time to jump off the deep end and dive into this. One of the things that I wanted to ask you was the introduction for when we started putting all of this together. Talk to us a little bit about the exploratory phase and how you went about identifying what you think we needed to successfully start a podcast.
Yeah, well, so methods as well as, resources.
Yeah, the first thing I think is most important, which isn't necessarily a method or resource, but it was like what we talked about in our last episode 18. Yeah, the reasons why. Why do you want to do a podcast? Having an understanding of the why you want to do the podcast helps you select the method, helps you determine the resources, helps you determine what level of commitment you want to have to this. For us, it was a little bit of a guy's night. We also wanted to put our, 12, 15 years of consulting out there for folks on the internet to hear. And we also felt like we had a lot of really good contacts and people we knew. And so, in that context, we knew we wanted to conduct some interviews, not only with each other, but also guests we had on the podcast. And so we knew that we were going to have a bunch of different sounds, right? And so we knew that was important to have some ability to have some customizations and some quick controls in the sound. I think that's what we'll talk about with some of the equipment. But when you talk about like the methodology and when you talk about some of the considerations that we had, Wally, a lot of it was, okay, well, we know we want to do video because all of us are we had ran video production together as kids, and we know that we wanted to incorporate that. We knew that if we did video, that would also give us some other mediums to publish our content, right? Instead of just audio, because you can do just audio, but if you also do video, that gives you YouTube and other video distribution platforms. And it also gives you the ability to produce shorts from episodes to use on social media and things like that. So our why and our consideration, those were some of the things that we thought about first. And then we really sort of, instead of like picking a methodology or picking something and going with it, we started really small. And I think that was important because we said, hey, what is our why? Like, what exactly do we want to do? And Wally brought up a bunch of great questions, and he goes, actually, I don't really know. If we talked about a bunch of topics, what would we actually talk about?
That's to add to that and to ask you a question. One of the things that we had all thought we were in alignment on, but we really weren't, was the why and what we wanted to do on the podcast. And so I very explicitly remember asking everybody, like, what do you want to get out of this objectively? And so for you, what was your why?
Yeah. And for me, my why was, I think we had a lot to share with the world. I thought we had an ability to interview people because as a consulting firm, we're basically glorified, babysitters and glorified interviewers to help people figure out their problems.
Not
detectives.
Detectives. Solving problems.
Babysitters probably isn't the right way to describe it.
We need a more professional word than babysitter.
Detectives are like the special forces of white collar work.
Special forces.
Yeah,
detectives,
I like that. Let's not let me. I'm sorry for making you guys feel lesser than. That was not my intention. But
as he pulls out a binky.
Yeah, suck on this. And so,
that was pretty good.
how we started was small. And what we did is we said, okay, if we make a small investment in some audio equipment, what does a small investment look like that we could potentially know? We could have the three of us and a guest. So we knew we needed 4 audio tracks at least. Hold on.
Let's identify what an investment was to us. An investment to us was tens of thousands of dollars.
No, not initially. An investment to us initially.
It was all about why.
An investment to us.
The money doesn't matter. It's about determining. Really, the focus is determining what you want to talk about and share with the world.
Exactly. Yeah. And then you can use that to determine, okay, what's my opportunity to make money with this? What budget can I really have?
Everyone has money to throw at a specific topic
or interest.
And it's because it's all about what is the return that you can get from that.
All depends on who wants to listen to you talk.
Exactly. And so when you look at what we did, we said, okay, let's go buy a $500 soundboard because we knew we had interesting things to share. We knew we had interesting contacts. Mm-hmm. We thought we could get a really good soundboard that gave us the ability to fine-tune audio and 4 different input tracks. So we went with the Rodecaster Rodecaster 2 Pro.
And that was mistake number 1
and that was mistake number 1. And the reason why that was mistake number 1 is because as the podcast grew, and we're using it right now still, but as the podcast grew and we integrated video, what we found is
we need more inputs.
You need some more audio inputs, but it does make it does help out a lot when you have the same brand, like Blackmagic. We have a Blackmagic switchers, right? We have Blackmagic cameras, and those really came on recommendation of the special effects company who's a client of ours, right? They really make, hey, for, what we're trying to do, nothing like super crazy professional. They make the best equipment.
Got it.
And so, but what the Rodecaster Pro 2 allowed us to do was for a reasonably cheap price, $500. It allowed the 3 of us to sit down and have a podcast in our living room that was audio only.
In Wally's living room, which was epic.
In Wally's living room, that was episode 0. It was epic.
Unscripted, unstructured.
And it allowed us to figure out
3.5 hours.
Yeah.
In the middle of the wintertime in front of the fire. It was it was badass. I think that was the point where we all looked at each other and said, this is a thing. This is a thing.
I could see myself spending a Monday evening with you guys doing this.
Right. And
hundreds to thousands of hours doing this, yes.
This is where we sort of said, okay, now we've understood the why we want to do this. We have an interest. We have an understanding of what our audience could be.
Let's stop. So we established your why. Okay, yeah. Wally, what was yours?
Spend more time with you guys.
Yeah.
Perfect.
And then Wally, I also feel like you have some really good insight to offer around topics that you're really interested in. And you offer different ways of thinking. So I think elevating your voice or having a way to elevate your voice around topics you're passionate about could also be a part of your why. For me, you'd wanted to have Al and I make a YouTube channel shoot from like 2008 onward.
Yeah.
Because you were just always filming everything we did.
I really think, I was. I really think.
We missed the boat on that one.
Yeah, I really think that we would have had a successful especially with shorts, we made a killing easy, right? But structuring some episodes like the startup life or just, all of these different captures, building a business from the ground up, at your parents' house or in the garage.
Yeah, but we also, Al and I are just also, generally speaking, like 2 pretty crazy dudes. Not like obnoxiously crazy, but we were pretty outgoing. Alan was pretty funny. I was funny when I wanted to be funny. And some of the stuff we did, it was blooper reel type stuff, and that's why you wanted to.
We were 3 brothers. We were 3 brothers growing up, starting a business together. In itself, it was inherently funny and cool and exciting and a little stressful. It had all of the great pieces of emotion that you would look for in entertainment.
Yeah, exactly. Entertainment. I'm glad you said that because my why was a mix of what we offer as a team, as a unit, because a lot of people like to work with us because of the teams that we have here at 3 Ventures, but also us specifically. we're very lucky that we've never really had to do anything by ourselves. So being able to share that team style and oriented approach
Right.
from 3 different brains was a part of my why. But
And
then the other
then
part
let's
of the
not
why
forget-
was the unscripted, unstructured Batman. I'm just kidding. Batman's not
Yeah.
going to make an appearance tonight. Neither is Donald Trump. But all the funny stuff that we all like to do and we all make each other laugh with. I thought that like we could run those two things in tandem.
Yeah, because at work we can't necessarily let our personalities come out a whole heck of a lot. I mean, we do; it's in our identity a little bit, but we're professional, and
Yes.
it's always professional first. And this is, I think, a good outlet.
Party
now,
in the
now you
back.
talk about the why. Like when you're talking about starting a podcast, you have to have something that internally, like intrinsically, you're motivated to do, because you're going to have to be putting together episodes at least on a frequent basis, maybe once a week or once every 2 weeks. And you're going to need to do that for 2 or 3 years to start to get some traction. You're going to need to have some consistency and some commitment to that. And so when you're talking about starting a podcast, understanding your why is the most important thing, because when we started, we made a little small commitment, audio commitment. We said, hey, let's test this out. We don't even have to publish this. Let's just talk about things that, make us laugh or funny, things we did in the past. And it was a hit and it was a hoot. And it was like, all of a sudden I woke up, that night I couldn't sleep. I was like, oh man, like
It got the gears turning.
the
gears started turning in all of our heads that this was bigger than each of us individually.
right.
And it was also a way for us to have one night together every week as well, for us to really dive into specific topics.
And playing to that consistency, that you brought up, Alan. It was pretty insightful and wonderful to every other day at school, in 2007, see your brother's bright and shining face, and then also look at the screen and see my bright and shining face.
on media and media class. And let's not forget,
so there's those little passions,
right,
that we kind of grew up around this space.
Yeah, we did.
And we are not only passionate about what we do, but doing this we've been passionate about for a long time.
We've just
and it
never
allowed
put it
us
into
to
practice.
create that YouTube channel, and it allowed us to do all these things that we've been wanting to do. And so now we've understood our why. And that was then when we start to get into the process of how you actually start and launch a podcast.
Yeah, so the process side of things, we were doing sort of the pre-preparation, and we were relying on you to do that. The November last year was a very interesting time for me because my kid was basically sick the whole month. I just remember having very strategic check-ins with you and going through and thinking about things from a very technical standpoint. Like, does this meet our technical needs and requirements? Okay, cool, Alan. Yeah, move on to the next step. And then it turned into the cataloging and identification of all the equipment we needed. So go ahead and take over from that point and talk to us about what we had to get to really put this studio together that wasn't just a bunch of wires connected up to a roadcaster.
Yeah, so the next thing is you got to have a dreaming session. And on that dreaming session, you basically go, okay, if this podcast is wildly successful, what do we think that looks like? And Wally and I had a phone call, and we talked about it. Well, it'd be cool. We do the video switching, and we'd have a producer at the desk, running real-time video switching, and we'd have, different camera angles. And we started kind of talking about what the traits of a successful podcast would look like. Is this something we want to have be mobile and like we want to go do in different areas, like Nook Boys, or do we want to set up a studio? Like, what resources do we have? And so we understood our why. Then we talked about what is our dream state.
And now add on some influence in there. Was there anybody who influenced you in the process? I know some of the people that influenced me, and I'll ask you the same question, Wally. Did you steal anything from anyone that was already doing this?
Well, I mean, I think you obviously have to look at the people who are really popular. I mean, obviously JRE is one.
Impulsive.
Yeah. Also, you have
Nook Boys.
Call Her Daddy podcast. I think on the female side of things, she does a really great job. I also think Nook Boys is right there. From a business podcast side of things.
Then you have a lot of guys that we also like MKBHD. Then you also have Linus Tech Tips. I mean, we are Philip DeFranco fans back in the day.
Correct.
There's a lot of
Still are.
Yeah, still are. Yeah. And SourceFed before they killed it. And so you
shout out Hack 5.
Yeah. You kind of get the gist of where we're going. So we understood our why, and then we said, okay, what's our dream and our ideal state? And so that allowed us to have alignment with, okay, what type of budget do we want to commit to this? What time commitment are we going to have? And also,
What type of budget? He said budget, like he consulted us on the budget piece.
Yeah.
What a nice guy.
Did.
So
Hey.
hold on. So we went through and we did an episode 0 where we basically just hooked up a bunch of wires in Wally's living room. Thank God his wife didn't kill us. She actually joined in on the podcast. We had a fun time. We got all the gears turning in our heads. The vision was there. The inspiration was there. What was the next step?
The next step was consult our client, who was a special effects studio, and we had our why, and we had
still is.
Yes, it still is. Thank you. I'm speaking in past tense. Why am I doing that? Thank you, Wally. And so we consult our
Alan
client,
was
who
awesome.
is a special effects studio.
Yeah,
and
and Alan is not here.
Yeah.
He's actually superimposed in,
Yeah.
by the way.
He's on a podcast right now. He'll
And if
talk
you,
to you
if you want
later.
some more information, check
I'm,
out
I'm an AI model.
check out
More
our-
on the upcoming episodes from
Yeah,
WAC Attack. Be
yeah.
sure to listen in.
Thank
So,
you.
but-
Still, obviously,
Yeah.
the AI knew exactly what I was going to say and
Yeah.
just said it. Come on.
Next steps. Next
And
steps,
I have been
though.
trained to interrupt Wally from the previous episodes, so that's what I wanted to do now.
And I'm just Curtis, and I like to interrupt Alan.
You
So
already know what I'm going to say, so it's a waste of my time anyway.
So back to your question, though,
Yes.
Curtis, on so what were our next steps? So we go and we consult our client of ours, and he goes, hey, if this is why you guys are doing it, and this is sort of this ideal state that you want to have, here's what I think you should consider. You should consider getting consider getting some camera equipment and some video switching equipment. And I feel it would be best if they were from the same brand and they were compatible. And you guys had an understanding of what, are you going to have a live producer, or are you guys going to be doing this video editing, and post-production? And we were like, oh, that's really interesting. So then we had to go back to the drawing board, because then we said, well, shit, who would we have doing our live production and video switching?
Yeah, in all reality, the video switching and camera choices do not matter in the grand scheme of things. Just keep
Right.
that in the back
yeah,
of
but
your head.
it was a problem that
what,
came up.
What
for us.
Alan said, you need to make sure that you have the same cameras.
Hey, Wally, could you just pull your mic a little closer to your face?
Yeah.
You need to make sure you have the same cameras, and then you need to make sure that you choose a video switching solution that matches your needs. The big distinguishing factor is not having multiple cameras. That's all.
Yeah.
That
So
are
we
different
didn't want to
branding.
go with like a Sony, is Mark 7, right? Or yeah, we didn't want to go with a Sony and then a Canon and a Nikon. We wanted to have all three of exactly the same cameras,
Which we're getting two more of, by the way.
with exactly
Yeah.
the same lenses, with exactly the same,
There
features and everything.
There
on
needed
it.
to be consistency per seat. So
Right.
Though if you're looking at this video now, current day, I would highly recommend taking a look at some of the Sony stuff that has come out in regards to their mirrorless camera solutions.
Yeah, absolutely. Because
And don't even quote me on mirrorless. I am the least expert
right.
in this arena. Back when mini DVs were all the rage, I got you covered.
Yeah,
You know what I
absolutely.
mean?
And obviously, this is not necessarily going to be evergreen if we're talking about certain models or certain types of equipment. But this is what we did. We went and we consulted with our client, who is
smart
a special
people
effects
who are
studio.
in industry.
And he helped guide us in that right direction. As you could go to YouTube and MKBHD and Linus Tech Tips, and there's plenty of other channels out there that can help you find.
DSLR video shooter, call up.
Yeah, perfect. That they can help you find all the right camera equipment. But for us, we knew we wanted to do a video podcast. And so what we decided was, well, we're going to use the cameras for photography. And we had a whole discussion about this. And we said, no, we're not. And so the guy recommended, he's like, hey, you guys should really go with the Blackmagic Pocket 4Ks. They're the most budget friendly.
Cheapest Netflix camera.
Yep.
Period. Done.
And they
Move on.
shoot, the best 4K for the dollar. And here are some considerations for lenses. And so we went with that. And that's originally the setup that we're on right now. And it's been really good because A, it was within a reasonable budget, and B, I feel like we have a really great quality product. So that just covered off though on the video side of things. It didn't even cover off on the audio.
The audio. So now I have the next question, right? We started audio first, then we got a recommendation. We got video in second. Now we had to have a way to tie all of this stuff together and actually get the equipment and get the studio set up. So now this is where the planning came into place, where we had identified all the equipment that we need, the compatibility of this equipment. So the successive steps were getting a studio. And so for people who don't have commercial real estate like we have access to, unless you're setting this up in your house somewhere, it's kind of hard because you have to have a studio set up. So what were some of the requirements that you had found that would work really well for us to have a place for us to set up our studio?
Yeah, obviously the breakdown and the setup was a big concern and considerations of Wally's and ours. We looked at our schedules. We said, hey, if we're going to commit to doing this once a week, that means we need to be able to shoot episodes as quick and as fast as possible. And so when you looked at all of the equipment that we ended up getting, because we also need to talk about lighting, we're going to talk about audio, then we're going to talk about the workflows and the production and all that type of stuff, plus the strategies.
And everything you do before we say 3, 2, 1 live.
Yeah, exactly. We're going to talk about all that stuff. But when we looked at the studio, we really looked at the studio last because we didn't know, hey, do we want to do this on a couch? Do we want to do this at a desk?
Well, we all know we didn't look at the studio first.
But we said, let's not lock ourselves in to a certain solution. Let's give ourselves the modularity and the flexibility to figure this out, because just like the Rodecaster was very portable, very easy to set up, and we did it in Wally's living room. We did it in Wally's living room, and we were like, shit, these couches are pretty nice.
And comfy.
It was kind of very comfortable to have it there. So we're like, do we want to do a Milk Boys style, podcast? Or do we want to do something JRE where it's more at like a table? And I mean, obviously we're at a table right now, but we've had some iterations here. And so that was really important for us to have the flexibility and to not just go all in and commit on something, but to go in just enough where we could start to record and figure out how we wanted to do things.
Yeah, to also add to what Alan's saying, and just keep an open mind and have your kind of analysis hat on at the same time, because you need to find what's comfortable for yourself, especially if you want to, spend multiple hours every week in a specific location shooting a podcast, right? We went through the couch play and we have now gone to tables, which, by the way, has been great. But, it's a continuous evolution, and it's exciting that is what that's our journey.
100%, that's the journey. So now this sort of gets into, okay, we wanted that flexibility. So now we've had the cameras and everything else. So we were assessing, okay, well, do we need to have some type of modularity with the studio setup and everything else? And so this is how I was getting back to tying into your question, which is then we looked at, okay, how are we going to mount cameras? Do we want to have mounts from the ceilings, or do we want to have them on tripods or whatever else? And so these considerations came into play, and we ended up going with tripods that are really mobile and really easy to set up and tear down. And the reason why is because we wanted that flexibility, because we are in a loft studio here, so we do have the ability to mount, from the ceiling. And these are all considerations that people have to understand. If they're on
we literally have a studio style.
A studio style
ceiling
setup. Yeah.
But if you're shooting in your basement,
we literally have, you can hang
1,000
pounds.
They're metal
easy
rafters. Yeah.
Off of one of those.
Yeah, I do ring
points.
muscle ups off of these things in
it just,
buildings.
I didn't mean to over accentuate how or.
Yeah, exactly. But if you're doing this in like a basement or at your couch or in a small office, these are all things that you have to think about, right? Can you get the right angle for a camera if you're doing a video podcast? And that is why I would encourage people to only go just in enough to start to shoot some episodes and see if you're going to be good on camera, see what you think about it, see, watch the episodes and figure out what you want to improve, because there is so much more we need to cover off on.
Oh, yeah.
On how to start a podcast, and you do not want to invest the time in doing that
and get it wrong.
Get it wrong if you have not done some pilots.
Do you advise newcomers to start audio first, because obviously you don't have to buy all the camera equipment? There's quite a low barrier of entry to enter.
Absolutely.
Can you ask this
audio
question
first.
to me, because I would like to answer it, because there's a lot of things going on in my head right now.
I didn't
finish the question.
I'm just my body language is towards Alan.
Yeah, for if you were listening audio while he was pointing at Alan.
Yeah, my apologies. So, yeah, same question to you, Curtis.
Yeah, so what I think was really powerful was you have to, when you get in and you actually do your first podcast, even if you're not going to publish it or put it anywhere, you will have that sense of feeling like if this is something you want to do or you don't want to do. But what we realized is that this is a time commitment. So yes, there's an upfront investment for you to get your actual physical equipment, but then there's a time commitment for you to do this thing consistently. And that's not just buying from you. If you have a family or you have other people that are dependent on you, if you're just by yourself and like your other friends are by yourself and you're all single, well, cool, that's great. But when you start adding more things into here, the complexities, with the complexities, they start to make it to where your schedules get harder to align and you can't give as much time. So that was the second piece for us. That was really big. But the third and the fourth piece was after we had ran through and done these trials, then it was a lot of really heavy introspection. We got to see ourselves on video, unedited for the first time, and realize there's maybe some stuff that you do or you don't do well. Then we got to hear ourselves, maybe understand that, hey, maybe you don't have a voice for a voice for a podcast, or you need to make some changes to the way you want yourself to be perceived on your podcast. And really, all of that stuff is going to change. And so that's the fourth piece. The fourth piece is change. You're inevitably going to need to change your setup, all of your hardware at some point or another to account for something that you now need. You're going to need to make some changes for the way that you're being presented on the podcast or how you're presenting yourself, right? Because you're going to see yourself raw. And that introspection piece, right? You're also going to make more of those changes. So this is all going to come full circle. And that's one of the biggest things that I think after doing, 100+ hours of this stuff that we've all realized is really important.
I agree 100%. And what Wally was talking about earlier was start with audio, because it gives you an opportunity to really hear yourself. It gives you an opportunity to get some reps in. It's cheap, right? And you don't
barrier of entry is zero. You can
right.
Minus a smartphone. You can start a podcast on a smartphone.
Absolutely, and
Sorry,
even just with headphones, right? Yeah. And so you could do that stuff, and you could really just start to see if you've got some reps, and you could determine your why and everything else. And then that when you've hit that point and you've done what we call some testing, and you've maybe listened to it with your wife or girlfriend or husband, etc., or you got some people and you're running this idea by them and you've got some validation, this is where you really have to start to plan. And when you talk about starting to plan, I think that this is really important. We just talked about all of the pre-planning items that help you be able to then think about what do you actually need to do in the plan.
And this is where your time commitment changes, right? So I said change is the fourth piece. Time commitment was the second piece. Continue going on, but this is one of the big things that we've realized is the preparation to do one of these episodes.
Yep. So now you think about your audience. Okay, so what's your niche? What are you going to be in? What are the things you're going to talk about and discuss, and how are you going to create and deliver content to them, right?
Yep.
And for us, we knew we didn't necessarily have a niche to start. We knew we were going to find that. We were going to shoot some episodes. We were going to bring people on who we thought were influential. And then we were going to see how the episodes really started to evolve and get listens and everything else. And then we were going to start to tailor the content towards what has been doing well.
Well,
right?
and audience feedback.
Absolutely.
They're
audience
looking for
feedback.
something. Yeah, absolutely. We're engineers in general.
Yeah,
Feedback loops, baby. Feedback
absolutely.
loops.
And it wasn't just people that had influence. It was a lot of people that had something good to say. Like we had Dragos on, talked about building a custom home. I mean, I would say that almost everybody would like to build their own custom home, right? How many people actually can is a different story.
So what is our niche? Is our niche interviewing entrepreneurs and people who are doing cool? Is our niche technology?
Or is it the WAC team
is our niche us?
Is it late night fun stuff? Like
exactly.
Who knows?
And so we didn't necessarily know. So when you talk about that plan, we said, okay, we know our audience is generally going to be entrepreneurial. It's generally going to be somebody who's looking to do a side hustle, maybe somebody interested in finance, technology, self-starter.
Yeah.
So usually have some health and fitness in their life. Yeah, a variety of
right.
Yeah.
And
gotta keep that brain healthy.
And so we said, okay, so we had some traits of our audience and we knew we were going to have to refine that. So we moved on to the next thing.
So we shot a shotgun in the dark, not a sniper rifle. Go.
Right. And because we didn't really want to lock ourselves in too much to something, but we knew we were going to be committed to doing this because we had a lot to share collectively WAC as a group. And so now you've knocked out the audience and we said, okay, so what's the type of content and what are the messages that we want to deliver? And the content and the message is really important because that's where you and I and Wally sat down and we had some introspection and we basically said, okay, for these episodes, what's our body language like? What's our mannerisms like? Are we doing a good job passing the conversation around the table? And, we had to figure out how we work and how we operate well together. And then once we sort of had those ground rules, we really had to come up with the structure for the podcast, because there's
Alan, we have a problem. I lost the conch.
Yeah,
I
you
can't
lost the
find
conch.
it. I can't find it.
Yeah, Lord of the Flies, for those of you who don't know that reference.
And I wouldn't say it was rules. It was more so, it was like a mutual respect for us on this podcast and delivering something that's, ear candy and eye and ear candy to those that
Correct.
are watching, where we're trying to bring value that somebody can plug into our show and basically have a team if they didn't have anyone. And so for us, in order to deliver the best experience, we all had to change and evolve to contribute the most value to the show.
And then so now you're talking about episode planning, right?
Yeah.
And this is really where we said, okay, for episode planning, we had to understand do we want this to be really kind of like structured and rigid, and do we want to have everything sort of pre-mapped out? And it's like, okay, we're only allowed to talk about these questions and these topics about these questions.
That was never going to fly, because I'm not giving an interview on 60 Minutes or being somebody from CNN or Fox News or blah 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 blah.
But what we realized was our episodes have to be aligned with something we're passionate about, something we have experience and professionalism with, something we have
or an interest,
or people we know who are doing something really good or have done something really good in that space.
And we bring them on the show, and then we basically let them tell their story and tell their experience and tell their entrepreneurial journey. And then we're able to then ask very strategic questions to build more understanding.
And so we knew for the structure of our episodes, we really had to have, instead of like a big outline of everything to ask, we knew we only needed to have like 5 to 7 topics that we generally knew we needed to get the conversation steered towards organically. And I think that was really important, because it allowed us to have some structure, because depending on who we brought on or what the topic was that we were talking about, it allowed us to hit on the key points. And then because why podcasts are so popular is for that in-depth, long-form content.
That's organic. It's very organic.
Right. And there might be a topic that is really, really important to discuss in some depth and in some detail. And then others, there might be, it might be a little bit easier to, just touch on the high-level pieces. And so that's for us how we went about planning our episodes. And now that we're not saying that would work for everybody, but when we looked at our audience and what our niche could be, we had to then build our episode plans and our episode content accordingly. And I think that was really, really, really important, because then the next thing was reps.
So what I hear you saying is the plan was more like an approach, but not a finite way of how we were going to do something.
Correct.
And so it allowed us to be prepared for what we are going to do, but allow the organic nature of the conversation to go in the direction that it was going to flow in, where then we knew what were some of the ways that we were going to supplement or extend the value we're getting from each of those segments.
Correct. Because if you are just you're hosting a podcast and you're just talking about certain topics and you're going through sort of different subjects,
yep,
and that's not aligned with your why, or your process of shooting episodes is not aligned with what you want to do or how you want to do it. What's really important in my mind is you're not going to have your personality come out. You're not going to have your differentiation come out. You're not going to have that thing come out that people really like about your podcast. And so for me and Wally and you, it was really important that was included in our process. And so I would actively encourage everybody, when we talk about getting started, it's really important to get those reps under your belt and figure out, how do you make sure your why stays in and comes out through the podcast?
Making sure that you describe who you are.
And you don't over-structure everything. But this is actually a really good point, because when we talk about podcast planning is just as important as the podcast, sort of script or key topics we try to talk about. Because before we shoot the episode, we definitely are making sure that we have a discussion beforehand, 10, 15 minutes about key talking points, so on and so forth, that we like to go through. And for me, that's just so incredibly important, because then it sort of gets us comfortable with the topic and it allows our personalities to come out. And then we sort of have like this pregame to the episode. And I feel like that is so important because your identity in doing a podcast is more important than the subjects you talk about.
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh,
So
did I lose? Okay, there you go.
There you go.
I think I might have got muted for a second. Dang, I lost my privileges there. I couldn't agree more. Allowing yourself to shine through on your podcast and your identity to shine through is really what makes you you and unique and who you are. And I feel like we took some of that adoption as well from, you had found the YouTube formula.
great book, by the way.
That we had all read. It's on Audible if you want to listen to it, via your ears and not your eyes. That was a mandatory read for everybody here on the WAC Attack team. And we all took it in and embodied a lot of the things that were in there, almost all of them. And we come from a heavily data structured background and an analysis and analytics background. So, the back half of that book for us was just repetition of nature we already know. But the first half of the book was really about how being authentic and knowing your audience is really what will drive the most value for you. So we talked about the inception, and then the planning,
The why, the planning,
the
getting reps underneath
introduction,
you.
the learning, the reps.
Let me talk about more of the process, because remember I said earlier, it's really important to get some reps and to understand your level of commitment before you go into the process.
Yes.
So I talked about
Elaborate on that for us.
I talked about the niche in the audience. I talked about the episode planning and making sure that you don't overstructure episodes to where your personality and your identity doesn't come out anymore, right? You want to make sure you keep that in there. But then there's also the technology side of things. You have to understand how podcast distribution works. So you have podcast channels, right? Think Spotify, Stitcher, iHeartRadio.
Let's put some context around this really quick. So when you talk about podcast planning, I feel like you're making a pretty large, you're casting a pretty large net. Why don't we break this down into a couple smaller segments? So if we're going to shoot a podcast, what is the pre-preparation planning that we're doing? Go.
Well, the pre-preparation planning that we're doing is, like I said, we're meeting with the team beforehand. We're going over the topic. We have agenda items, talking points we want to get through. And we're not overstructuring or making the podcast super rigid.
Do you do any, if we're bringing somebody on, do you interview them at all in that process?
Oh, absolutely. We interview them in that process. And that's all a part of that episode planning, right? That's all a part of, that conversation that you have. And
who's involved in that process? Is it just you and the person, or is producer Scott involved?
Well, pre-planning, I think what's really important is to come up with that list and review it. I mean, there's always a process pre-planning that we do. We plan episodes out. We have those in Jira tickets. We go through key.
If you don't know what Jira is a project
management
management software. It's highly technical.
And so, we have key talking points that we go through. We review that before we ever have a studio set up or anything, or we have the studio on for a shoot and guests there. We make sure we have it all aligned with what we want to talk about. And then when the guest comes in or the three of us come in, we talk about the topic we want to discuss. We have that sheet that we review, and that's sort of in the pre-planning, like I had talked about.
So we've got out of the pre-planning, and you've kind of got into the second phase. So now let's talk about when somebody comes to the studio. What are some of the things that you've learned and that we've adopted, maybe from a cultural perspective here at the WAC Attack podcast, that when we have somebody come in, what do we do for the first 30 minutes before we shoot the episode to really get things ready?
Yeah. The biggest thing is you got to make sure that the environment is comfortable, and you got to make sure you got a good way to take the the edge off of things.
Is that like a drink? Is that like we share a meal together? What is that?
Sometimes we have drinks out here. Other times we have meals here. I think meals and a drink is a good way to sort of loosen things up. If you have a guest on, I definitely like, getting there a little bit early, having a meal there if you're shooting later at night. It gives you an opportunity in sort of like a non-stressful setting to have some conversation and like to start to get to know each other's personality, because you do have to vibe really well with the guests when you're on screen with them.
Oh yeah, you really have to.
And the dinner beforehand really helps out. Just, pro tip, bring a toothbrush or a toothpick. But on the opposite side of things, right? That's why I said you got to get some reps in, and you have to sort of make it interesting, because if it's just you talking all the time about the same subject, and you're not like a really authoritative person, you're not a really well-known person in an industry, like it can get fairly repetitive and fairly boring. And so, that's why I said having your ability to have the identity in the podcast is really important. So that's on the episode side and the episode shooting side. I want to talk more, and I want to get into the nuts and bolts of what you're actually going to need to be successful in the podcast. We've given you our experience.
So just hold on a second. I'm going to get there. I have one more follow-up question. So I think you talked about the culture piece, right? What is it like when somebody comes on the podcast here? What's the culture? We usually have a meal. We share some drinks. We talk a little bit about generally where things are going. There's also some guidance around, hey, if you're not comfortable talking about certain things, this is stuff you brought up, Alan, or if you're not comfortable talking about certain, numbers, maybe speak in like 7 figures instead of millions. And then when we actually have the episode, okay, we basically use all of that as our playbook. So the episode's over. Okay, what are the things that we're doing before we leave for the night at the studio?
I mean, the things we're doing before we leave at the night, we always shoot the intro of the podcast at the end of the podcast. I think that this is a great take because you don't really know where the conversation's going to go. And like I said earlier, we generally have topics we like to touch on. Sometimes we don't get to all those topics, but we might get to a few really good ones that we didn't plan for because you can't plan for an organic conversation.
No, like when Trump shows up.
Yeah, in the Batman voice. And there's some funny aspects to the episodes we shoot. But at the end, we'll sit there and we'll do the intro. Hey, on this episode of WAC Attack, we discuss our experience starting a podcast and the process for how you can start your own podcast and launch it, right? We shoot those intros. That's fun. We also try to shoot something a little bit more engaging, a little bit more funny for social media. And those have been really good for us because we do the video podcast.
Do we script those out at all?
No, we don't script them out.
They're by the seat of your chair.
Yeah.
And do you have more than one person do them?
Yeah, we try to have as many people do them as we can because you never know who's going to have the best one. We just sit people down in the seat, we spitball it, and sometimes there's really great stuff that comes out.
Oh my God,
other times,
Wally's I see the smudge on your screen. You were dying when he said that a few weeks back.
Yeah, that was a pretty good one.
So we get all the media collected. Okay,
right.
We've shot all the video, we've done the introductions, and we're done for the night. One of the things that we don't have to do is we don't have to tear down the studio, but we do have to turn the studio off and leave the office. What does it take from the time we leave the office to the time somebody is listening to this podcast? What does it take to get to that step?
Yeah, very good talking point. So there is the episode post-production that you need to consider, okay? And then
what is post-production? Break this down for us.
I'm going to get into this. And then there is, after the post-production, there's all of the tools and platforms that you need to distribute and disseminate the podcast, okay? Let's focus on the post-production right now.
So post-production is editing?
Right. It's going to be editing. If you have a video podcast, it'll be video and audio. If you just have an audio podcast, it'll just be audio, okay? So really important here to understand that if you are an audio-only podcast, you are literally sound in somebody's ear. If your audio does not sound great, crispy, flawless, like it's coming out of a studio in a beautiful voice, here's what you need to consider. You need to consider having some type of tool like Adobe Premiere and a plugin that automatically cancels out background noises, makes your voice sound a little bit better, makes it to where you're going to be crisp and clear and clean. And so I actively encourage you to do some research on that. Now, that's a tool that you're going to need for post-production. We use Premiere for the video side of things. We are doing live switching here. And on that live switching, we're doing all of the cuts, everything right here. So we're not having to do all of this crazy video editing behind the scenes because producer Scott, shout out producer Scott, is actively doing all of the video switching. And so we have that file when it outputs to a single file.
As a quick sidebar to that, Adobe also has their Adobe Podcast AI tool. So if you're an audio-only podcast, you can, if you're using crappy mics, which we really hope you're not, you can use that tool, and it really cleans up your audio to about 90%-ish of the professional.
So now let's talk about the hardware and the considerations that we had for this post-production. Originally, we had SM7Bs because we have those at work.
SM7Bs are made by who?
They're Shure.
Okay.
Shure microphones are the same ones Joe Rogan uses. Very, very popular. And we had those at work for office setups, because we are virtual consultants and we want to make sure our audio sounds really nice. But what we found is they were a little tinny, basically meaning in the lows they were kind of like the lows weren't very sharp. They were kind of flat. And so
if the lows weren't sharp, give an example of that really quick.
I can't give you an example of it because our audio engineer is so good that our audio sounds great most all the time. And so we ended up going with these Earthworks microphones because they have some extra hardware in here that helps with the processing. But what we also did on the audio, because we didn't want to do any post-production audio, is on the Rodecaster. And this is actually one of the reasons why the Rodecaster is pretty good for, introductory podcasts, is you can actually go and customize all of the settings in there for like noise gates and lows, mids, and highs. And it just gives us a lot of really crisp audio. And so to me, that's really, really important because we wanted to minimize our post-production time because that takes the most amount of time, more time than shooting the episode. So you need tools to do that. You need computers to do that. You need hardware to do that. It is a lot of equipment to make that happen and to make that work. And also, you don't have to use the Adobe products. There's plenty of products out there that you can use. If you're doing virtual podcasts, you can use like Riverside FM, stuff like that.
For a virtual podcast, I think it's really important that you get quality microphones.
Yes, but if you're doing a virtual podcast, here's the challenge, right?
What about the people you're having on the show?
Right.
Yeah.
And, if you have a guest and they call in and you're doing a virtual podcast, like, for example, the Rodecaster can actually have somebody call in on a phone and it's hooked up via Bluetooth, and that can record out directly to the audio channels that we're in. And so these are all considerations, your why, your audience, who you're going to have on, how you're going to do this. That's why we said you need to really understand that before you get into this process. So now let's say you get done editing and you get done doing everything that you need to do for the podcast episode. Now the podcast distribution platform, you need one. That is basically where you store all of your audio or video files for your podcast.
Okay.
You give a name, description, etc., episode, season numbers of the podcast. And there's free and premium platforms that you can use. And there are some very key things to consider here because, one, you're going to want to figure out how do you want to monetize the podcast. Do you want to be a middleman to where, a third-party ad network can display ads in your podcast? Spotify is really great for that with Anchor FM. Now it's podcast for Spotify podcasters. But there's also other podcast distribution platforms that host all of your files and then they distribute them to all of the networks. So you will have to create an account for Amazon Music, Spotify, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, so on and so forth. Now, what you do is when you create those accounts, your podcast distribution platform, they have an RSS feed. And you copy paste the RSS feed to those accounts.
And it's pulling all your media files.
And it's just pulling all the media
metadata.
files. So in that one platform, you upload the episodes, and now they're distributing it on all the channels. But what is really important is considering how do you want to make money from the podcast? Is this a hobby? Is this something you're trying to make money with?
So
or is this an interest
So this is
of
the
yours?
monetization strategy. And this is, I think, is the, kind of the last point here because it's the end of each podcast is, part of the process. What, in your opinion, what is the strategy for revenue generation here at WAC Capital? And what do you think are some good tactics, because I like to ask multiple questions at the same time, that people can take to optimize those channels?
Four ways you can make money. Okay. Generally, these are the 4 ways. There's probably some extra ones, but they're usually going to fall into these buckets.
All right.
The first one is you serve ads on your podcast.
All right.
Now, that's like you just produce content. Let's say Spotify wants to put ads on your content. You get some commission from that. That's option 1. Option 2 is going to be subscriptions. Okay. So if you have exclusive content, or
shout out OnlyFans.
Yeah. Only Curtis. If you have exclusive content or you have ad-free content, you can have a subscription for that. Okay. So that's a consideration for your podcast distribution platform.
So if you were a business and you wanted to put out exclusive content around certain topics that you guys have a lot of industry experience with, let's say you have a very specific solution in a specific industry, you could put this content out there. You could sell it to your customers or potential customers for them to have some access to knowledge.
Yep.
All right.
100%. Now, the third bucket is going to be sponsorships. So organizations or companies coming to you and saying, hey, I'd like to sponsor your podcast. And so that is something that you can do, and you're going to have to manage and broker that on the back end. Okay. Then the fourth piece is going to be, that's going to be merchandise. Okay. So those are the four general ways that you're going to be able to monetize a podcast. And it's really important that whatever platform you select, with whatever your goals are, whatever your why is, they give you the opportunity to do that. We went with Anchor FM, which was now Spotify Podcasters, because it has all of those features outside of the merchandising. And so that was really important to us. And also because, we felt Spotify was probably the best platform for podcasts at the current time. And we are still able to distribute to all of the channels. And also it gives us, I'll call some fairly, decent analytics into where audience analytics, episode analytics, right? And then some ads and demographics analytics. And so,
okay, so we talked about, Spotify. You kind of gave the progression of areas to generate revenue based on maturity. I was adding that maturity piece in there because I feel like the more mature you get as a podcast, the closer you can get to each of those things and the more money you can make. What about other platforms? So let's say you're a video and an audio podcast and you want to be on YouTube.
Absolutely. This is another very key consideration we had. So to make money from YouTube, you have to get into the YouTube Partner Program. To get into the YouTube Partner Program, you have to have 40 watch hours and you have to have 1,000 subscribers. Okay.
Is it 40 watch hours or is it 4,000?
Don't quote me. I think it's 40 watch hours and 1,000 subscribers, or 400 or something like that.
Because I think there was two different ones that I think you might have just mixed up on accident.
Yeah, it's irrelevant. You can go to the YouTube Partner Program. You can look up the requirements, but it's something along the lines of so many subscribers, which is 1,000 as of shooting this episode, which is like May 6th, 2023, and then so many watch hours, which I think is 40 watch hours.
40,000.
I don't think it's 40,000 watch hours. That's a ridiculous amount of hours. So that's
wait. We should just pull out a phone and check this right now.
Yeah, I'm telling you, it's 40 hours or 400 hours. It's nothing ridiculous. It's 1,000 subscribers.
All right, good.
But what you need to do is you need to get into that program. That's where YouTube will start serving ads on your videos for you, and you will be able to middleman and be able to make some money from that. And that is a very important way for you to get into an alternative revenue stream on an alternative platform, because this is incredibly important. If you're a video podcast, YouTube is the second largest search engine in the world. And so that is a very, very, very good opportunity for you to get your content out on a platform where you can make some money with it, right?
Yes.
And so, that's really how we looked at starting a podcast and successfully launching a podcast. Now, there are really important pieces that you want to follow up with after launch. That's promotions, that's collaborations, that's production changes, etc. I don't want to give away any of our tips or secrets.
There's secret sauce there, so we're going to stop.
Or things
please
with that.
Mute his mic, producer Scott, and put mine on. Even though I don't sound that great tonight, I appreciate you guys, staying in tune. Wow, come on. I am not somebody that just got shot in Call of Duty. It's for the YouTube Partner Program, also known as YPP. It's 1,000 subscribers, and there's one of two stipulations you have to meet. You're either going to get 4,000 valid public watch hours, emphasis on the public, okay? Or 10 million valid public short views within the last 90 days. That is the latest update.
Okay, so 4,000 watch hours.
I was right.
Okay, perfect.
I think Anchor FM was something like 140 watch hours.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay, so not 40,000, but 4,000 watch hours. Yes. So you basically have to have each subscriber watch 4 hours.
So that's non-shorts, right? Shorts is 10 million views in 90 days. So they came out with the short update because the shorts right now are the Wild West because there's no copyright issues. So we've reached a point where we're not going to get into the sausage making here at the WAC Attack podcast. But what we can tell you is the analysis of your reach, the amount of people that are watching your content, how you're keeping them engaged is important. And I'd like to, I only really have one last question for you because we didn't talk about this. From an engagement perspective, what tactics or strategies do you think are important to establish at the beginning, in the middle part of the podcast and towards the end of the podcast to keep people engaged.
Well, I mean, I always think you want to come out of the gate interesting, a high energy, banger question, like something to really grab somebody's attention, but if you're really getting into like a very factual type of conversation, I believe it's really good for you to keep the conversation on topic. If you're like us and this podcast and it's structured but a little unstructured in some of the details, I think it's really important to make sure that the topic is going down an interesting conversation organically that's not too structured or is not too rigid. And that's definitely a great way to keep people entertained. The other thing too is don't be afraid. Like if there is a portion of the episode that you shoot that's not really that good, don't be afraid to cut it out.
Yeah.
Right. And, keep
if
people
it's
engaged
dull,
because
if it's dull.
Yeah. Engagement is gold, is digital gold. And it's so, 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 so important to make
Stop,
sure.
rewind, Donald Trump voice,
Yes.
go.
It's so, so, so important that you keep people's engagement. It's gold, solid gold, Mar-a-Lago gold, gold like my golf game, gold like my presidency. Moving on. But anyway, yeah.
All right.
I don't know why I have the Donald Trump voice, but I do.
It's all good. So we've established our why. We talked about our approach. We talked about the planning we took. We talked about, there's really three key things that are always going to change in your podcast. You're going to have to contribute a lot of time. We talked about what it takes to prepare for an episode and like have the culture when you have somebody on,
Correct.
What we're doing during the episode, how important our producer is here at the show, and also making sure that we have everything set up prior, what we do post, what we do post show before we leave the office.
Correct.
What we're doing in post-production, how we are putting that into a syndication framework, how that's being distributed.
But what we didn't really get to talk about too much was the gear. And I think that that's an important thing. I want to give out some considerations there because we've basically given everybody a good, solid understanding.
We're going to make a YouTube video on a BTS on our
behind
gear.
the scenes.
Yeah.
And I think we've done a really good job of giving people an understanding of how they could get to planning, starting, and launching a podcast, right? I don't want to give away the secrets of promotion, but on the back side of things, what's really good, and I think that this is important to talk about some of the technology before we wrap it up, is we have 4K cameras, okay, shooting in 4K live. You need to make sure your cords, if you're doing video, are able to have that amount of throughput, okay? If you're doing audio, got to make sure you have good, crisp, clean audio. You got to have good cords. You got to have good microphones. And also, the headphones make a really big difference because the headphones, you want to hear yourself talk and others talk in the podcast because it gives you a good understanding of like, is somebody too far away from the mic? Or,
Yes.
Am I talking the right way? Am I enunciating my syllables correctly? It gives you an understanding of all of this. And so when you talk about the considerations we had, right, those were key. But then let's get to the fact that we were doing audio. So we wanted a switcher. So we went with the Blackmagic because we went with the Blackmagic Pocket 4K cameras. They shoot some of the best 4K cinematography for the budget, right? So the ATEM Mini Pro ISO, is what we have for the switcher. But key considerations for video switching are how many video inputs do you have? And your mic inputs, okay? So like one of the challenges we have that we're going to have an update for is the Rodecaster, okay, has four channel audio with the 4 mic inputs. That is USB-C. Yeah, that's USB-C, and it goes into the computer where we record it. But if you want to take all of the 5 or if you want to take the 5 files that the ATEM Mini Pro outputs, you have to sync up the mics to each of the camera files because we can have files for each of the cameras that are individually shooting, and then we can have the final file, which includes all of the live switching that Scott's doing. And a key consideration there is you want to make sure that whatever audio board you have, if you're doing video, you want to be able to make sure that you can link up your microphone track with your video track.
You need to have an equalized point in time for all of your feeds. And so,
well, that's the system's going to do a lot of that equalization.
We're getting into the more technical bits, and I think maybe that's a good topic.
The equipment is
episode.
really, really, really important to talk about. These are key considerations if you're doing a video podcast. If you're doing an audio podcast, the Rodecaster Pro 2 is going to be outstanding. But from the or from the video perspective, that's where things got more complicated. And then you also have to think about it like this. Are you going to do your podcast live?
Yes.
Are you going to stream it somewhere? Or are you going to do post-production? So now if you're doing live or you're doing streaming, you're going to need a computer that's got something like OBS Studio. It might be OBS or
You're
OBS
gonna need
Studio.
a team.
I mess up the name. And that will allow you to stream to Twitch or YouTube or those. But you also will then have the ability to sync all your audio and your video to OBS Studio to do that live streaming. So when you introduce video has a high level of complication with the hardware components, with the wires, and with your ability to sync up with audio and then distribute that if you're going to be distributing in a live context. These are very, very, very key considerations if you're looking to do a video podcast.
So that really brings up good talking points that we could potentially follow up on a variety of different things, because on these platforms, they also have things that people that are watching live could pay for to have interaction with. They could have the confetti cannons and all kinds of stuff. And so the interoperability of these systems is really important. And so that's a package that we're not fully developed in yet, but we excuse me, I'm so sorry. We left the door open to
We could talk about that at a future
have
date.
all of our existing equipment be compatible.
Right, because that's streaming. And so we're not looking to do streaming, but your hardware, you should be having these considerations if you ever want to do streaming. This is why knowing your why and what your goal vision is really important.
And
because
your revenue. What's your revenue targets? I'm sorry, not revenue targets. What's your ways that you want to generate revenue?
Right, because you could sell the ability to press the confetti cannon button for $5.
Yeah.
Right, that's interaction, but you're going to need to do a show live to do that. And so now you have these considerations here.
Let's just put that thing right by Wally.
Yeah, just so, but
I'm gonna unload $1,000.
These are the things that I hope people would think about as they're starting a podcast and they're wanting to put it out there. So if I could summarize, start small, start with audio, understand your why, understand what your goal vision is. Once you do those things and you feel like you could commit to doing this and it's something you like, then go through the process of figuring out, are you going to incorporate video? How do you plan episodes? How do you guide episodes in the middle of a conversation? Introspectively, how do you get better at being a moderator or being somebody who's delivering a subject, a topic or a message? And then considering, how are you going to be distributing this content? Do you need to shoot some intros? Do you need to shoot some outros? Right? Or is this going to be live? That's just all of the consideration of producing the content. Then you have the publishing and promotion, which you really need to consider, revenue opportunities. How are you going to distribute it? Are you going to be doing it live? And then on top of all of that, we talked about the hardware. So these are the very key things you need to consider as you are looking to start and launch a podcast.
This has been really good to provide an analysis of our experience, our learnings, our understandings, reading the YouTube formula, putting together the information that not only did we already have from working with existing clients in a similar space, doing similar things, but also actually going through the process ourselves. If somebody wanted a professional looking studio, assuming they had the space for it, just a starting ballpark range, if they want to get similar level equipment to what we have here that's professional,
right?
What are they looking at? Well, tens of thousands of dollars?
I would say $20,000 is a good budget. And the reason why $20,000 is a good budget is because depending on the amount of cameras you need, depending on the amount of microphones you need mic arms, you need cords, you need cables, you need headphones, you need like we have the producer TV here, right? That we can see all the camera feeds on and we can see the live production feed. Now everything has to then go into a computer, a soundboard, a mic for
Alan,
the producer.
We love you. You've told us this stuff already,
right?
baby.
Yeah. So you got all of that, right? So when you consider the budget, I say $20,000 is a budget if you want to do a studio. But something to also consider is there are studios that will let you come in and shoot per hour. And so if you don't want to do all of this legwork, you can go and rent time in a studio. And that is where simply knowing the why, the how do I want to do the podcast, and the topic planning is incredibly important.
Do all your pre-work, and then you're really only paying for your time in the studio.
Yep. And that is a great way to dabble into seeing if this is something you can commit to long-term and you can actually pull off and do.
Alan, this has been really insightful and a good episode for those who are looking to get started. We're going to wrap it up with some engagement here. All right, boxers or briefs?
Boxers.
All right. If you had to pick a year, what year are you going back in time and living in for the rest of your life?
1969.
Okay. Next question is, in what year were you already alive were you going to go back and relive for the rest of your life?
Ooh, that's a tough one. 2019.
Okay. You can only do one of these things for the rest of your life, racing or golf.
Shit.
Come on.
Racing.
Oh, good man. Okay. Would you rather play 18 holes with Tiger Woods or play in the U.S. Open? And Tiger Woods would never be able to play again.
Play in the U.S. Open because that means I'd be hella good at golf.
Yeah, but you suck. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Yeah, that was a bad question.
Yeah.
Okay. Hey,
dude,
football or
I
baseball?
could be the spokesperson for Bogey Golf.
hey, yeah. Alan, you could be a cart path connoisseur, all right?
Yeah. All right.
I got you. Hey,
Anything else?
Baseball or football?
Baseball.
Would you rather be courtside at the NBA Finals or on the glass at the hockey for the Stanley Cup?
Stanley Cup.
All right. Would you rather be performing a podcast or have an OnlyFans account?
Shit. Am I a guy or a girl?
Girl, female.
How much money am I making?
I don't know. You could be.
This is not a rapid fire question, right? And it depends. What is my niche? We talked about knowing your audience earlier,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Are you gonna sell yourself? Are you gonna sell your face online or sell your body?
Podcast.
Let's just hope you're the Joe Rogan of the female world. All right. Shirts or shorts? You only get one for the rest of your life.
Oh, shorts.
Oh, hell
Easy.
yeah. Go full-blown Liver King. All right, here's a good one. You only get to eat one type of organ for the rest of your life.
liver, not testicles.
Damn it. All right, bone marrow, bone broth.
Bone marrow.
Okay, more weights or more dates?
More dates.
Oh, you get flabby then. Aren't you married?
I'm married, but I go on dates with my wife all the time.
That wasn't the stipulation.
You
Not at
said
all.
more plates or more dates, and I said more dates. You never said with who, when, or how.
All right.
And you never said I couldn't go to the gym.
All right. Would you rather be really good at running marathons or really good at lifting weights?
Lifting weights.
Oh, shucks. Thought I might have got you there. All right. Well, I'm about out of questions, but, that about wraps it up. Just kidding. Toilet paper or wipes?
Toilet paper because I can flush it.
Light coffee or dark roast?
Neither.
What?
You never said neither wasn't an option.
I said this or that, and I didn't say those.
And then I said, fuck off.
All right. I think that
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for watching the WAC Attack podcast. If you are looking to start your podcast or you are looking to, get started with doing something like we're doing, I think we've given you tips and tricks and recipes to do that. We're not going to give you the secret sauce for the promotion side of things, but if you'd like to do it on a budget, start with audio first. And if there is a podcast studio near you that does shoot video, go there, see how they do things. Pay a little time. It's a very low barrier to entry, and go ahead and get started.
I think it's always a great way if you can pay and not have to invest, but you could try before you buy, like an Arrive and Drive and Racing. And you could do that for a podcast, and you could pay a couple $100 to go shoot at a studio for 3 or 4 hours and try everything out. That might be a really good way for you to see if this is actually what you want to do before you make an investment. And with that, this is the WAC Attack. Thank you very much.
Thank you.